When most people think of evil, they imagine something obvious: darkness, fire, horns, a face twisted with hatred. But the truth is far more unsettling. Evil rarely announces itself so boldly. It doesn't always come dressed as a villain. In fact, it often comes dressed as a friend. Evil, in its most dangerous form, hides behind charm. It wears a smile. It offers a helping hand. It flatters you, whispers to you, and convinces you it only wants what's best for you, while all the while leading you down a path of destruction. This is why the Stoics, and many spiritual teachers throughout history, warned us not to judge by appearances, because appearances deceive. The enemy you should fear the most isn't the one who openly threatens you. It's the one who pretends to care while secretly manipulating you. Think about it in your own life. Have you ever met someone who seemed overly kind, almost too charming? It rarely tells you, do evil. Instead, it tempts you to compromise just a little at a time, until you wake up one day and wonder how you strayed so far from your truth. And if you're not vigilant, if you're not grounded in your values, you can easily mistake this influence for friendship, mentorship, or even love. That's what makes it so dangerous. The Stoic philosophers remind us that our first duty is to guard our mind. Epictetus said, "The soul is dyed the color of its thoughts." If you surround yourself with voices that flatter your ego, feed your fears, or manipulate your choices, eventually your soul will reflect that poison. This is why recognizing these signs is not just helpful, it's necessary. Because once you see clearly, you take back your power. Once you know the disguises evil wears, you're no longer fooled by the mask of kindness. Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed that the most destructive people in your life didn't come to you with anger, but with charm?
They weren't the ones who shouted at you. They were the ones who whispered in your ear. They didn't push you with force. They pulled you with persuasion. That's how evil works. It doesn't always strike. Sometimes it seduces. Now you may wonder, why call it satanic? Because throughout history, the idea of Satan wasn't just about fire and brimstone. It was about deception, the deceiver, the one who twists truth, who makes wrong look like right, who convinces you to betray yourself in small, seemingly harmless ways until you're trapped. And if you've ever dealt with someone who leaves you feeling drained, manipulated, or doubting your own worth, you've experienced a shadow of this influence. But here's the good news. Once you know the signs, you can protect yourself. You can stop giving access to people who are slowly poisoning your peace. You can reclaim your clarity, your dignity, and your strength. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to walk you through 5 unmistakable signs that someone may not just be toxic, but satanic in their influence over your life. These are not obvious signs like anger or cruelty. They're subtle. They hide in compliments, in advice, in offers of help. But once you learn to spot them, you'll never be deceived again. Before we dive into them, remember this. The purpose of this video is not to make you paranoid. It's not to make you see demons in every person you meet. The purpose is to make you discerning, to sharpen your perception, to help you see clearly who truly walks with you and who walks with a mask. The Stoics would tell us that peace comes from wisdom, and wisdom begins with awareness. When you become aware of the destructive forces hiding in plain sight, you can finally choose freedom. So here's my challenge to you as you watch. Keep an open mind. Reflect on your own relationships. Ask yourself, who in my life truly builds me up? And who might be slowly tearing me down while pretending to care? Because once you answer that question honestly, everything changes. You begin to step out of the fog. You begin to reclaim your power. And most importantly, you begin to live with the clarity, strength, and peace that Stoicism and life itself calls us to. So let's begin.
Here are the 5 clear signs someone's influence may not just be toxic, but satanic in its subtle, destructive power. Sign 1. Subtle manipulation and control. The first sign of satanic or deeply destructive influence is subtle manipulation and control. Unlike open aggression, this doesn't come at you with raised voices or physical threats. Instead, it comes quietly, disguised as care, responsibility, or looking out for you. It weaves itself into your daily interactions until you can't even tell if the choices you're making are your own or the result of someone else's invisible strings. Think about it. Manipulation often works through 3 main weapons: guilt, gaslighting, and script flipping. A boss might guilt trip you. "I thought you were committed to this team. After all we've given you, you're leaving at 5. Suddenly, staying late isn't about work. It's about your loyalty being questioned. A partner might shift blame. You bring up an issue, but somehow you end up apologizing for bringing it up in the first place. A parent might weaponize disappointment. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" And just like that, your own needs feel selfish. Your independence feels like betrayal. Each of these tactics chips away at your sense of judgment until you start doubting yourself more than the manipulator. That's the dangerous part. Manipulation doesn't just control your actions, it rewires your thinking. Gaslighting is the clearest example. Imagine you know something happened. You remember the words spoken, the way you felt. But the manipulator looks you in the eye and says, "That never happened. You're imagining things." And over time, as this repeats, you stop trusting your own memory. You begin questioning your own sanity. This is how subtle control works. It doesn't take your agency in one strike. It erodes it drop by drop until you hand it over willingly. The Stoics, centuries ago, already warned against this danger. They taught that our most sacred possession is our reason, our ability to think clearly, judge accurately, and act in alignment with our values. Epictetus called this prohairesis, the faculty of choice, the inner freedom that no one can take from you unless you surrender it. That is what manipulators are really after, your ability to trust your own judgment. Because once you stop trusting yourself, you become easy to control. So what's the Stoic solution? First, guard your reason. When someone uses guilt or gaslighting, pause. Don't rush to respond. Ask yourself, is this true? Or does this align with reality as I know it? Take time before you agree, apologize, or accept blame. Slow down the decision-making process so you can see clearly. Second, recognize manipulation for what it is. Label it. If someone constantly flips the script so that you're always the one at fault, call it in your own mind. This is blame shifting, not truth. By naming the tactic, you weaken its hold. Third, practice self-control, prohairesis. The Stoics remind us, you cannot always control what others say or do, but you can always control your response. Instead of reacting with shame or confusion, step back. Reclaim your inner authority. Say to yourself, I will not let their voice override my reason. Let me give you a personal reflection. Years ago, I had a leader who was a master manipulator. Every time I set boundaries, they made me feel guilty, like I was selfish for wanting balance. Every time I raised a concern, they turned it back on me, making me feel like I was the problem. At first, I believed them. I doubted myself. But the more I studied philosophy, especially Stoicism, the more I realized what was happening. Their power wasn't in their words. Their power was in my willingness to accept those words as truth. The moment I stopped reacting automatically, the spell broke. I began pausing, questioning, reflecting, and what I found was liberating. The manipulator's control only worked as long as I gave them access to my unguarded mind. So let me ask you, where in your life do you feel your agency slipping away? Who makes you feel like you're always at fault, always guilty, never enough? Is it a boss who uses loyalty as a weapon? A partner who twists every argument until you're the one apologizing? A parent whose disappointment is the leash that keeps you from living freely? Recognize it. Name it. See it for what it is. Manipulation, not truth. Here's the bottom line. Subtle control is still control. And while it may not leave visible scars, it damages something even more precious: your ability to trust yourself. But the Stoics give us a shield. That shield is reason. It is slowing down, reflecting, guarding your mind before handing it over. It is remembering that no matter how persuasive the manipulator sounds, their words are not reality unless you make them so. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it." The same applies here. It is not the manipulator's words that truly harm you. It's your acceptance of them as truth. Once you reclaim your judgment, once you stand firm in your own clarity, the manipulator loses their power. Their guilt trips fall flat. Their gaslighting doesn't confuse you. Their script flipping no longer works. So the next time someone tries to guilt you into compliance, gaslight you into silence, or flip the script to avoid responsibility, pause. Guard your mind. Ask yourself, what is real? What is within my control? And then choose, not out of fear or guilt, but out of reason, because that is where true freedom lies. That's sign number 1, subtle manipulation and control. The quiet tactics that erode your confidence and judgment. Recognize them, guard your reason, and remember, your agency is your most sacred possession. Don't give it away. Sign 2, obsession with inverting traditional values. The second sign of destructive, and yes, even satanic influence is an obsession with inverting traditional values. This isn't always loud, and it isn't always obvious. It often comes dressed in sophistication, clever arguments, and polished rhetoric, but its aim is always the same: to take what has been understood for centuries as good, noble, and life-giving, and flip it on its head. Suddenly, kindness is labeled as weakness. Loyalty is mocked as a trap. Humility is framed as cowardice. Generosity becomes foolishness. And cruelty, betrayal, and selfish ambition, these are sold to us as strength, freedom, and intelligence. At first, this reversal can sound bold, even refreshing. It masquerades as independent thinking or breaking free from tradition. But listen closely, and you'll hear the poison beneath the words. They'll say, "Nice people always finish last. If you want to survive, you have to be ruthless." Or, "Don't be loyal. Loyalty only chains you down. Real freedom is to betray before you're betrayed." Or even, "Why give when you can take? Why forgive when you can win?" These phrases are presented as wisdom, but in truth they normalize cruelty, betrayal, and selfishness. The danger of this inversion is not just in one statement here or there, it's in the repetition. The more we hear these twisted messages, the more they corrode our moral judgment. They plant seeds of cynicism that grow slowly, almost unnoticed. And over time, entire cultures shift. Empathy is mocked. Integrity is treated as optional. Freedom is no longer about living with dignity. It's redefined as the power to exploit others without shame. What begins as a clever turn of phrase becomes a philosophy of life. And what begins as individual corruption spreads into cultural decay. The Stoics, living in the corruption of ancient Rome, were deeply aware of this danger. They saw emperors, generals, and philosophers alike seduced by rhetoric that glorified cruelty and mocked virtue. But the Stoics stood firm. They believe that true strength comes not from betraying values, but from upholding them. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Simple, clear, non-negotiable. That was his shield against the inversion of values, and it can be ours as well. So how do we protect ourselves? The Stoic solution is to protect your moral judgment. Don't let someone else's clever words override your conscience. Don't let charm and sophistication seduce you into betraying what you know is good. One powerful test is this: evaluate beliefs by their fruits. Ask yourself, does this belief produce kindness or cruelty? Does it lead to trust or betrayal? Does it strengthen virtue, or does it feed selfishness and exploitation? If a belief consistently produces harm, division, and corruption, it doesn't matter how clever it sounds, it is rotten at the root. Let's bring this down to real life. Imagine a workplace where betrayal is rewarded, and the people who gossip, cheat, and undercut others rise quickly. At first, it seems smart. They're climbing the ladder. But what happens over time? Trust dies. Collaboration collapses. Everyone is competing against each other, and no one is working for something bigger than themselves. Or picture a relationship where loyalty is mocked. Don't get too attached. Don't trust too deeply. Everyone betrays eventually. What kind of family, what kind of home can grow out of that soil? None that lasts. This is why the inversion of values is so dangerous. It doesn't just hurt individuals, it corrodes the very foundations of community, culture, and civilization. Let me share a reflection. Years ago, I knew someone who loved turning virtues upside down. He would laugh at kindness, sneer at loyalty, and glorify selfishness. And for a while, he seemed to win. He got ahead. He impressed people with his realism. But I also noticed something else. He was always isolated. Nobody trusted him. His victories were shallow, built on sand. He gained attention, but he lost respect. He had power, but no peace. That's the ultimate result of inverted values. They may win for a moment, but they rot the soul. And eventually, they collapse everything they touch. So let me ask you, who in your life tries to convince you that kindness is weakness? Who makes you feel foolish for being loyal or generous or honest? And more importantly, are you starting to believe them? Because if you are, this is the moment to stop, to step back, to reclaim your compass before it's stolen. Here's the bottom line. Clever rhetoric may win arguments, but it cannot build a life. What builds a life, what builds peace, community, and meaning, is virtue. The Stoics remind us that virtue is not weakness, it's strength. Loyalty is not a trap, it's the foundation of trust. Kindness is not naive, it's the power that sustains civilization. So the next time you hear someone flip values upside down, don't be impressed, don't be seduced. See it for what it is, corrosion dressed up as wisdom, and refuse to let it stain your soul. Because in the end, the world doesn't need more people mocking virtue. It needs more people courageous enough to defend it. That's sign number 2, obsession with inverting traditional values. The clever twisting of truth into lies, good into evil, freedom into exploitation. Recognize it, resist it, and root yourself in virtue, because that is where true strength lies. Sign 3. Fascination with suffering. The third sign of destructive influence is one of the most disturbing, a fascination with suffering. This is when someone shows an unusual interest in your pain.
They lean in when you're hurting. They ask questions not to help you heal, but to keep the wound open. They present themselves as caring, but what they're really doing is feeding off your grief, using your pain as their currency for attention, gossip, or control. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that some people only seem close to you when you're struggling? When you succeed, they're distant, maybe even uninterested. But when life knocks you down, they appear at your side, eager, attentive, almost too interested. At first, it looks like empathy. But then you realize they don't want your healing, they want your pain. They encourage you to relive the trauma, to dwell on the grief, to reopen the scars. They frame it as being there for you, but the truth is darker. They need you broken because your brokenness makes them feel useful, powerful, or superior. This is one of the cruelest forms of hidden malice because it masquerades as love. They'll say things like, "Tell me again what he did to you." Wow, you must feel so horrible about that mistake. How do you even cope? I just want to make sure you're really processing this, so let's go over it again. But listen closely. Notice how their words never move toward healing. They don't point you toward closure, forgiveness, or strength. They circle back again and again to the wound. They don't help you move forward. They chain you to the past. The danger of this fascination is that it keeps you trapped in suffering that should have become wisdom. Pain, in its proper place, is a teacher. The Stoics saw it not as punishment, but as a training ground. Seneca said, "Fire tests gold, suffering tests brave men." Pain is meant to refine us, to strengthen our character, to help us grow. But when someone keeps dragging you back into it, they turn pain from a teacher into a prison. And if you let them, they'll keep you there forever. So what's the Stoic solution? First, remember pain is for growth, not entertainment. If someone keeps circling back to your suffering but never celebrates your progress, ask yourself, are they really helping me heal, or are they feeding on my wounds? Second, recognize the difference between empathy and exploitation. True empathy helps you carry the burden. It gives you strength to move forward. Exploitation keeps you stuck because your pain serves someone else's needs. Third, set boundaries and walk away if necessary. You don't owe endless access to your wounds. If someone insists on reopening them, limit what you share. And if they refuse to respect your healing, sometimes the wisest choice is to step back completely. Let me share a reflection. Years ago, I confided in someone about a painful season of my life. At first, I thought they were a safe place. They listened. They asked questions. They seemed genuinely invested. But as months passed, I noticed something troubling. Every conversation circled back to that pain. Even when I was ready to move forward, they wouldn't let it go. They'd say, "But are you sure you're over it? Tell me more about how it felt." It was as if my healing threatened them, because my pain was the very thing that kept our bond alive. Eventually, I realized the truth. They didn't love me. They loved my suffering. And when I stopped feeding that dynamic, the relationship faded, painfully at first. But ultimately, it gave me freedom to heal. So let me ask you, who in your life always seems most interested when you're hurting? Who thrives on your sorrow but disappears when you're strong? And more importantly, are you letting them keep you tied to wounds that should have already turned into wisdom? Here's the bottom line. Suffering is not meant to be entertainment. It's not meant to be a spectacle for others or a chain around your soul. Pain is a season, not a sentence. It has a purpose: to teach, to strengthen, to refine. Once it has taught you, you're meant to rise from it, not replay it endlessly. Marcus Aurelius put it simply,
If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. The same applies here. If someone keeps you chained to the memory of pain, remember, you hold the power to revoke that chain. You can decide, I will no longer let my suffering be a source of entertainment. I will no longer let others use it as leverage. I will rise, I will heal, and I will walk forward. So the next time someone insists on revisiting your wounds, smile gently but firmly and change the subject, or end the conversation altogether. Because healing requires space, and space requires boundaries. That's sign number 3, fascination with suffering. The people who don't want your healing, they want your pain. Recognize them, protect yourself, and remember, pain is a teacher, not a prison. It is meant to make you stronger, not to entertain others. Sign 4. Hidden, symbolic communication. The 4th sign of destructive influence is one that many people overlook because it seems harmless, even fashionable. Hidden symbolic communication. Evil rarely shows up in full costume. It rarely announces itself openly. Instead, it hides in plain sight, in subtle symbols, in art, in fashion, in branding, in imagery that at first seems decorative, but often carries meanings that stretch back centuries. Now, before we go further, let me be clear. Symbols themselves don't have magical power. A shape on a shirt or a design on a logo won't curse you or force your hand. But here's where the danger lies. Symbols influence culture, and culture influences thought. The repetition of symbols normalizes ideas, even inverted values. And once those ideas are repeated enough, they slip past our conscious defenses and begin shaping what we accept, what we tolerate, and what we eventually celebrate. Think about it. Ancient civilizations used symbols to communicate ideas that words alone couldn't carry. A carved image, a woven pattern, a painted design, these weren't random decorations. They carried meaning, often spiritual, often moral. Today, we see echoes of that in modern life. Occult-inspired designs appear on clothing and jewelry, framed as edgy or fashionable. Logos borrow from ancient symbology that once represented inversion, rebellion, or chaos. And because it's everywhere, on t-shirts, in music videos, in corporate branding, we stop noticing. We stop asking what it means. And when you stop noticing, normalization begins. Let's make this practical. Imagine a friend who wears a pendant with a symbol that once represented cruelty, deception, or inversion of values. They may wear it just because it looks cool. But here's the effect. Every time you see it, your subconscious is reminded that this symbol is acceptable, trendy, even desirable. Multiply that across millions of people, clothes, media, branding, entertainment, and suddenly what was once considered corrupt or dangerous becomes mainstream. And the scariest part? You didn't even realize it was happening. The Stoics didn't deal with TikTok trends or corporate logos, but they did warn us about hidden influence. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to guard the mind against impressions. He wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." Symbols are impressions. They may not force your hand, but they color your imagination. They plant seeds, and if those seeds aren't questioned, they grow into a worldview you never consciously chose. So what's the Stoic solution? First, stay vigilant. Don't sleepwalk through culture. Ask questions. Why this symbol? Why this design? What values does it reflect? Second, sharpen your perception. Don't take everything at face value. A shirt, a tattoo, a logo. These are rarely random. If you sense inversion, mockery of virtue, or glorification of vice hidden in the imagery, take note. Third, remember, symbols don't curse you, but they can shape you. The power isn't mystical, it's psychological.
And psychology matters, because over time, repeated exposure reshapes what you see as normal. Let me share a reflection. Years ago, I walked into a store filled with edgy artwork, skulls, inverted crosses, chaotic designs. At first, I brushed it off as just aesthetic, but after a while, I noticed something. The more I saw these images, the less shocking they felt. What once disturbed me now seemed ordinary. That's the danger. Not that a symbol casts a spell, but that it numbs you. What you once resisted, you now accept. What you once questioned, you now ignore. And once your guard is down, inversion seeps in quietly. So let me ask you, what symbols are you surrounded by daily? In your clothes, your media, your environment? What imagery are you unconsciously allowing to shape your perception of what is normal? Are those symbols aligned with virtue, kindness, truth? Or do they subtly glorify chaos, cruelty, and inversion? Here's the bottom line. Symbols may be small, but their influence is not. They are shorthand for values, carriers of meaning. And in a world saturated with imagery, the battle isn't over whether symbols exist. It's over whether you notice them, question them, and resist when they mock the very values that sustain life. The Stoics would remind us, your mind is your fortress. Don't let it be infiltrated by subtle impressions that corrode virtue from the inside out. So the next time you see a design, a fashion trend, or a logo that seems to glorify inversion, pause. Don't panic. Don't overreact. But don't ignore it either. Recognize it, question it, and guard your judgment. Because what you allow to repeat around you eventually repeats inside you. And once inside, it becomes harder to resist. That's sign number 4, hidden symbolic communication. Evil influence that hides not in words, but in symbols repeated until the abnormal feels normal. Stay vigilant, sharpen your perception, and above all, protect the fortress of your mind. Sign 5. Counterfeit spiritual enlightenment. The fifth and final sign of destructive influence is perhaps the most deceptive, because it hides in the very place we often search for light. Counterfeit spiritual enlightenment. This is when arrogance, selfishness, and ego are cloaked in the language of awakening, freedom, or higher truth. On the surface, it looks like wisdom. It sounds like empowerment, but underneath, it's poison. Here's how it works. A false teacher or manipulative voice will encourage you to reject compassion, honesty, or humility, framing them as chains that hold you back. They'll whisper, "Why care about others? That only limits you. Why be humble? That only keeps you weak. Why be honest? The world belongs to those bold enough to lie when it benefits them." And they disguise this message as freedom. But it's not freedom, it's corruption. It's not awakening, it's arrogance dressed in spiritual robes. This counterfeit enlightenment often gains power through flattery. They'll tell you, "You're not like the sheep. You're one of the chosen few who can see the truth." They'll claim to have secret knowledge that only the awake can access. And once you start believing you're superior, you stop questioning them. What begins as a quest for truth can quickly turn into spiritual pride, a belief that you are above compassion, above humility, above the very virtues that make us human. This is dangerous because it isolates you. Instead of building bridges, counterfeit enlightenment builds walls. Instead of connecting you to others, it inflates your ego until you look down on them. Instead of softening your heart with wisdom, it hardens it with pride. And slowly,
you become enslaved, not to truth, but to an illusion of superiority. The Stoics were deeply aware of this danger. They saw it in false philosophers who used rhetoric to gain fame instead of truth. Seneca warned that knowledge without virtue is empty. He said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." In other words, even spiritual knowledge, if sought for ego and not for growth, leaves us poorer, not richer. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, constantly reminded himself to stay humble. It is possible to be happy, even in a palace. That was his way of saying, greatness without humility collapses under its own weight. So how do we guard ourselves against counterfeit enlightenment? First, judge teachings by their fruits.
Ask yourself, does this belief make me more patient, more compassionate, more virtuous? Or does it make me proud, arrogant, and isolated? True wisdom always builds humility, courage, and care for others. False wisdom inflates the ego, dismisses virtue, and corrupts the soul. Second, stay rooted in humility. The Stoics taught that wisdom begins with admitting how little we know. If someone claims to have all the answers, be cautious. Genuine wisdom never boasts, it serves. Third, remember that freedom without virtue is not freedom at all. It's slavery to the ego. The person who believes they owe nothing to others, who sees compassion as weakness and humility as a chain, is not free. They are trapped inside the narrow prison of self. Let me share a reflection. I once knew someone who followed a so-called teacher online who preached freedom from morality.
The teacher claimed that honesty was for the naive, compassion was for the weak, and that the truly enlightened cared only for themselves. At first, my friend felt powerful. They believed they were rising above the sheep. But over time, I watched their life unravel. They pushed away relationships. They became suspicious of everyone. Their arrogance isolated them, and when hardship came, they had no one left to lean on. That is the fruit of counterfeit enlightenment. Isolation, emptiness, and arrogance that eventually consumes you. So let me ask you, who are the voices influencing you right now? Do they leave you more grounded, more compassionate, more patient? Or do they leave you feeling superior, isolated, and dismissive of others? Because that question alone may reveal whether you're listening to truth or to its counterfeit. Here's the bottom line. True wisdom humbles, false wisdom inflates.
The person who truly awakens doesn't become arrogant. They become gentler. They don't reject compassion. They embody it. They don't rise above humility. They root themselves in it. Because they know the deepest truth. None of us are beyond the need for virtue. Epictetus once said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Counterfeit enlightenment convinces you that you already know it all, that you are above others, that you have nothing left to learn. True enlightenment reminds you there is always more to grow into, more to learn, more to become. So the next time someone tells you that compassion is weakness, that humility is a chain, or that freedom means selfishness, stop and ask, does this sound like growth or like corruption? Because the greatest danger is not ignorance. It's false wisdom that looks like truth, but rots the soul. That's sign number 5. Counterfeit spiritual enlightenment. The flattery, the false awakening, the ego dressed as wisdom. Recognize it, resist it, and remember, true wisdom always produces humility, patience, and love. Anything else is a counterfeit. We've now walked through the 5 signs of destructive, even satanic, influence. Subtle manipulation and control. The obsession with inverting traditional values. A disturbing fascination with suffering.
hidden symbolic communication. And finally, counterfeit spiritual enlightenment. Each one of these isn't always loud or obvious. They don't usually come at you dressed in fire, rage, or open hostility. More often, they come wrapped in charm, politeness, or even spiritual language. They come smiling, flattering, whispering, promising freedom or truth, while all the while undermining your peace, your strength, and your sense of self. And that's the most unsettling reality. Evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks like a friend who just wants to help. Sometimes it looks like a leader who knows what's best. Sometimes it looks like a teacher, a partner, or even a voice in your own head that uses clever words to convince you that good is weakness, that loyalty is foolish, that compassion is chains. But here's the key reminder. You are not powerless. The Stoics remind us that awareness is protection, not paranoia. The more clearly you see these signs, the less they can control you. Once you recognize manipulation, it loses its spell. Once you see the inversion of values for what it is, you refuse to let it corrupt your soul. Once you realize someone feeds on your suffering, you can step away. Once you notice symbols shaping culture, you can sharpen your perception. And once you identify false enlightenment, you can choose humility, patience, and truth instead of ego. So, what do you do with all this? First, set strong boundaries. You don't have to give everyone access to your mind, your heart, or your story. If someone crosses the line, you have every right to step back. Second, walk away when needed. Not every battle requires a confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is simply to disengage, to stop feeding energy to people or systems that drain your spirit. Third, trust your intuition. That uneasy feeling in your gut, that subtle tension in your spirit. It's your oldest safeguard. It's there for a reason. Don't ignore it. Don't explain it away. If something feels off, it probably is. The Stoics would add one final piece. Stay grounded in virtue. Because no matter how clever the rhetoric, no matter how polished the mask, falsehood cannot mimic true character forever. Virtue is your compass. Integrity is your shield. Courage, compassion, and humility, these are not weaknesses. They are the strongest defenses you have in a world full of charming liars.
Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. That simple discipline kept him centered in a Rome filled with deception and corruption. And it can keep us centered today, too. So let me leave you with this thought. In a world where manipulation hides behind smiles, where values are inverted until cruelty looks like strength, where some even feed on your pain or sell you false enlightenment, your greatest weapon is not fear, but clarity. Clarity to see, courage to set boundaries, and strength to keep walking in virtue, no matter who tries to pull you away. If this video gave you new insight, take a moment to reflect. Which of these 5 signs have you seen in your own life? And how did you respond? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you found value here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next step in this journey of Stoic wisdom and inner strength. Because at the end of the day, evil doesn't win by force. It wins by deception. And the moment you see clearly, the spell is broken. Stay sharp, stay grounded, and walk in virtue. That is your greatest defense.